Microfeminism is a term that sort of describes like small everyday improvements that you can make in your life to try to make things more equitable and bring about feminist principles. Some examples of this would be typically female politicians are called by their first name. So just referring to any female politician by their last name instead of that. So instead of Kamala, you would do Harris. There's also examples where when you hear a job that's predominated by men, you would use female pronouns. So if someone said, my doctor said this, you could say, what did she say? Oh, is this what she recommended? There's also calling out any man who interrupts a woman speaking, whether it's interrupting you or someone else. Another is if you have two people at a job and you don't know who is the one in charge, just assume the woman is the boss. There also tends to be a habit of men not yielding to people on the sidewalk, even if they're walking on the wrong side. So when that happens, I just don't move and I make them move. When someone, like a man, is being angry, just call that being emotional, and say oh, I'm sorry you're being emotional and you can't get your emotions under control. Especially because when you think about it, people tend to use that against women and use that as a justification for why women can't be in positions of power, when in reality, the majority of the emotions are typically done by men, if you count anger as an emotion. If someone asks a male coworker this, but there's a female who knows more about it, you could say, did you ask XYZ? She seems to be very knowledgeable about this, more than I am. Typically, women in jobs are given, even if they have the same position, they're given the more managing tasks, the more cleaning and organizing, and making lists of stuff, to-do lists, and all of that. So just assigning the males in a workplace those tasks instead of automatically giving them to women or waiting for someone to step up, because the people that do tend to be women, because that's sort of what society has pushed on us, that is our role. I think men also just tend to get in the habit of not realizing the work, like the everyday chores that need to be done around the house, and will sort of do the weaponized incompetence where if they do get asked to do something, they'll do it so terribly that they won't be asked again. So just don't clean up after husbands, boyfriends, roommates that are men, and just make them do those little tasks and plan the groceries, plan the meals, plan all of the things that need to be done to maintain the house that week, because it's not a small task, and it shouldn't just automatically be assumed that that is a woman's role. I've also seen people say that they refer to sports that are done by men, male sports, because people just assume sports means men. But when you're talking about women athletes, they say women's soccer. So just reverse the roles and do it back to them about male sports. If you're serving people dinner, serve the women first, because typically the men are served first. I'm also just not really a fan when people will go out of their way to hold a door open for you and let you go first, even if they were obviously there first. So you can just hold the door open for men and make them do that. Or like if you're in an elevator, typically a man will say like, "Oh, after you" to a female, but do that back at them. Be, "Oh no, you first," to sort of like flip the roles. I've also noticed since moving to the South that even when I carry like very small amounts of things, like if I just take a bag out to the trash, that people will stop and men will ask like, "Oh, do you need help with that?" So if you see a man carrying anything, do that to them. Say, "Oh, do you need help with that? That looks really heavy. Can you do that by yourself?" I like to also just use gender neutral pronouns when referring to groups of people. Or I've also seen people do this where instead of saying like, "Hey guys," people, when referring to like a group of mixed genders, saying like, "Oh, hey girls, let's do this," and say, "Oh, that's a gender neutral term," like how similar to how people do it with the guys term. For any sort of holiday, typically the men expect the females to do all of the cooking and like managing the guests and cleaning up afterwards. So if someone is planning a holiday, say, "Oh, what is insert husband's name or male name making for Thanksgiving? What is he going to do for Christmas?" I think women tend to use a lot more, like less aggressive ways of asking for things. So when writing a work email, like typically, I know my first instinct is to say like, "Oh, do you mind doing this?" But instead of doing that, just say, "Write a draft of this and send it to me once it's finished." Just being more direct and getting rid of all of the niceties and the "can you please, do you mind," all that sort of stuff. I'm definitely not going to be taking my partner's last name, especially like I'm getting my PhD. I'm not going to work for that many years and publish papers under my maiden name to then just change it because I get married. And if I do, I would hyphenate. But you can also just assume, like, "Oh, are you gonna take her last name when you get married?" Because the whole reason why women take men's last names is because back in the day, and even in some current day places, women are seen as property for the fathers to sort of sell off into marriage. Which is why the whole concept of like no intercourse before marriage existed, because it would sort of taint the women. It would be less valuable to sell her off into a marriage. Obviously, none of these are going to fix all of the sexism in the world, but it's just like little things that maybe can make people think and realize that the default is not always true or a good way of thinking of things.